The date is July 14th, 2025. My name is Detective Alina Torres. Exhaustion is a constant companion these days, a heavy cloak I cannot seem to shed. For weeks, sleep has been a luxury, a distant memory from a life I barely recognize. The city's relentless hum has been my soundtrack, a symphony of sirens and shadows. When the call came, it promised a change of scenery, but not of pace. A death at the Blackwood Manor, a quaint countryside inn that prided itself on tranquility. The irony was not lost on me. I drove through winding roads, the city lights fading in my rearview mirror, replaced by the stoic, silent sentinels of ancient trees. The air grew cooler, cleaner, but it did little to clear the fog in my mind. Arrival at the inn was an exercise in contrasts. The building itself was a picture of rustic charm, with ivy-covered stone walls and welcoming warm lights glowing in the windows. It looked like a postcard from a simpler time, a place where the worst thing that could happen was a misplaced reservation. But the flashing blue and red lights of the patrol cars painted the idyllic scene in strokes of harsh modern reality. The tranquility was a facade, a thin veneer over something ugly. I stepped out of my car, my joints aching in protest, and pulled my coat tighter. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and a profound, unsettling stillness. The usual chaos of a crime scene was conspicuously absent. The innkeeper, a man with a face etched with worry, met me at the door. His name was Mr. Gable, and his hands trembled as he pointed me towards the second floor. He spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid the very walls were listening. His fear was palpable, a contagion that seemed to seep into the very foundations of the old building. I ascended the creaking staircase, each step a groan that echoed the weariness in my own bones. The silence here was different from the peaceful quiet of the countryside. It was heavy, oppressive, and filled with unspoken words. It was the silence of a secret being kept, a truth being buried under layers of polite smiles and feigned ignorance. My destination was room 207. The door was slightly ajar, a silent invitation into the heart of the mystery. A uniformed officer stood guard, his expression grim. He simply nodded as I passed, his eyes telling me what I already suspected. This was not a simple case. The air inside the room was cold, stagnant, holding its breath. The world outside, with its chirping crickets and rustling leaves, felt a million miles away. Here, in this small space, time seemed to have stopped. My fatigue was a dull throb, a constant reminder of the long night ahead. But beneath it, a familiar spark ignited. It was the thrill of the puzzle, the pull of the unknown. The game, as they say, was on. The scene inside room 207 was meticulously, unnervingly neat. It was less a crime scene and more a carefully composed tableau. The victim, a man I would soon learn was a prominent crime reporter named Julian Croft, sat upright in a high-backed armchair. He faced the window, looking out at the dark woods beyond. His hands rested calmly on the armrests, his posture relaxed, almost peaceful. Were it not for the unnatural pallor of his skin and the vacant stare in his eyes, he could have been mistaken for a guest lost in thought, admiring the view. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no chaos. Just a man, a chair, and a profound, deadly silence. On a small, polished wooden table beside him lay a single stark clue. A folded piece of white paper. I used my tweezers to open it, my movements slow and deliberate. The message was written in neat block letters, the ink a deep, unforgiving black. It contained only 4 words. He wrote too much. A motive and a taunt, delivered with chilling simplicity. It was a direct challenge, a statement from a killer who was confident, precise, and utterly in control. Julian Croft had dug too deep, and someone had decided to end his story permanently. This was not a crime of passion. It was an execution, clinical and cold. The quiet of the room seemed to amplify the message's brutal finality. My forensic team arrived, their quiet efficiency a small comfort in the unnerving stillness. They began their work. Media group, forensic technicians dusting for fingerprints, collecting evidence in room at stock at the distribute _equally, dusting for prints, collecting fibers, examining every surface with meticulous care. Yet their efforts yielded nothing. There were no foreign fingerprints, no stray hairs, no scuff marks on the floor. The door showed no signs of forced entry. The lock was intact. The window was securely latched from the inside. It was as if the killer had simply materialized in the room, delivered their fatal judgment, and then vanished into thin air. The paradox was infuriating. A man was dead, yet there was no physical evidence that anyone else had ever been there. The cause of death was as elusive as the killer. The coroner found no wounds, no marks on the body, no signs of poison in the initial tests. It was as if Julian Croft had simply stopped. His heart had ceased to beat. But why? The scene screamed murder, the note confirmed it, but the physical evidence whispered of natural causes. It was a perfect contradiction, a puzzle designed to mislead and frustrate. I stood in the center of the room, the silence pressing in on me, the weight of the impossible facts settling heavily on my tired shoulders. This killer was not just a murderer, they were an artist, and this silent room was their masterpiece. The next 4 days were a descent into a labyrinth of dead ends. Each path I took led to a solid wall of silence. The first and most obvious dead end was the inn's security system. Mr. Gable had informed me with a convenient shrug that the cameras had been on the fritz for a week. A power surge, he claimed. It was too perfect, too neat. The one piece of technology that could have given us a face, a timeline, a ghost on the stairs, was useless. It felt less like a coincidence and more like a deliberate act of sabotage, another layer of insulation for the killer. The darkness that had claimed Julian Croft's life was now obscuring my investigation. My attempts to interview the other guests and staff were equally fruitless. They were a cast of characters seemingly chosen for their inability to see or hear anything of consequence. A retired couple claimed to have been asleep. A traveling salesman swore he was on the phone with his wife all evening. The cleaning staff had seen nothing unusual. Their stories were rehearsed, their gazes averted. They weren't just unhelpful, they were afraid. Their silence was a thick, impenetrable fog. They were protecting themselves, not from me, but from the unseen power that had silenced Julian Croft. They knew that speaking up could earn them a similar fate. Julian Croft's life offered clues that led only to more questions. He was a reporter known for tackling corruption, for exposing powerful people who preferred to operate in the shadows. His recent articles hinted at a massive story, one involving high-level officials and corporate conspiracy. He had enemies, that much was clear. But which one? His notes were encrypted, his sources anonymous. He had built a fortress around his work, and now that fortress was his tomb. The motive, he wrote too much, was a vast open field. It could point to a dozen different people, each with the means and the reason to want him gone. It was a clue that pointed everywhere and nowhere at once. The frustration gnawed at me, winding itself around my fatigue until they were indistinguishable. I would sit in my temporary office, staring at the evidence board, a sparse collection of photos and dead-end notes. The silent room, the silent witnesses, the silent cameras, the silent victim. It was a conspiracy of silence, orchestrated by an invisible hand. I felt like I was fighting a phantom, chasing a whisper in a storm. The pressure was immense, not just from my superiors, but from the case itself. It taunted me with its impossible simplicity. Someone had committed the perfect murder, and they were watching me fail to solve it. On the fourth day, pushed by a desperate hunch, I returned to room 207. The official investigation had concluded its work there, but the room still felt wrong. Something was out of place. My eyes scanned every detail, every fixture, every shadow. I was looking for the flaw in the masterpiece, the one detail the artist had overlooked. My gaze fell upon the smoke detector on the ceiling. It was standard, unremarkable, exactly like the others in the inn, except for a tiny, almost invisible dark speck on its white plastic casing. A speck that wasn't dust. It was the lens of a camera, so small it was almost imperceptible. My heart began to pound. I carefully removed the device and took it back to the lab. This was Julian's camera. He must have planted it himself, feeling unsafe, knowing he was being watched. He was trying to protect himself, to capture evidence against whoever was threatening him. The fool. He thought a camera could save him. The footage was grainy, the audio faint, but it was a window into his final hours. I saw him pacing the room, his face tense. I heard fragments of a phone call. He was warning someone. "They know," he said, his voice strained. "They know everything. It's not safe." He was trying to save a source, or perhaps a loved one. I fast-forwarded the footage to the night of the murder. There he was, sitting in the chair, just as we had found him. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read 22:47:16. He was alive, his head turning nervously towards the door. Then, the screen went black. A solid, empty void. No sound, no picture. My breath caught in my throat. I watched the timestamp continue to run in the darkness. Seconds ticked by. An eternity of nothing. Then, just as suddenly as it went out, the picture returned. The timestamp now read 22:48. 44 seconds had passed, and in the chair, Julian Croft was dead. His posture was the same, but the life was gone. A chill, colder than any I had felt in that room, snaked its way down my spine. This was not a power surge. This was not a malfunction. Someone had disabled the camera remotely for exactly 44 seconds, just long enough to commit a murder without being seen. It was a display of incredible technical skill and terrifying power. The killer knew about Julian's hidden camera. They had watched him, waited, and then, with surgical precision, they had erased themselves from the record. And as I stared at the screen, a horrifying realization dawned on me. If they knew about Julian's camera, then they knew I had found it. They were watching me. The game wasn't over. I had just become a player.